Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Asia Undercurrent series. Our presentations are sponsored by the government of Japan. Our host is the government of Japan. And as a little bit of housekeeping, if I may, let me ask you to direct yourself, if you have questions, to the Q&A box on your screen. And if you do have a question, please use your name and affiliation when you give the question. So it is our great honor and pleasure today to welcome two immensely distinguished guests, the former Minister of Digitalization here in Japan, Makishima, and the US Ambassador to Japan, Rahm Emanuel. Welcome both of you to coming. We don't have too much time, so I'll only give very brief introductions. Makishima-san is from Yokosuka, and she's been elected to the Diet 4 times now. After earning her PhD at International Christian University here, following an MA at Georgetown in the US. So welcome to our event today. Ambassador Emanuel is a fixture in American politics for years and years now, serving on the Clinton Finance Committee many years ago, but with some business background as well at Wasserstein Perella and on the Freddie Mac board. He was chief of staff to President Obama in 2009 and 10, and then decided to take a little vacation and be, mayor of Chicago for 8 years. Great vacation. And now we are very, very lucky that he has joined us as ambassador here of the United States here in Japan. So welcome to you both. Let's go immediately into our topic for the day, which is a vision for the digital garden city nation here in Japan. Former Minister Makishima, if I may ask you to start out, could you give us an explanation, particularly from the digitalization point of view? What is this digital garden city, and what are your plans for making it happen?
Thank you very much for your wonderful introduction. It's my great honor to introduce Japanese vision for digital garden city nation with Your Excellency Ambassador Emanuel and Dr. Feldman. Vision for a digital garden city nation is a new vision for each local areas that fully benefit from digital technologies and provide convenience and attractiveness while preserving the abundance of the rural areas. This is our approach to promote smart city projects, which is aiming for society where everyone can live conveniently and comfortably anywhere in Japan. So we promote the sharing of values toward the common goal of enhancing the sustainability of local lifestyles and improving the well-being of local people, while placing importance on the consumer's perspective, and will draw out the efforts for mutual assistance. The government will combine the power of industry, the government, academia, financial institutions, labor organizations, and the press to present a new national model intended to achieve bottom-up growth throughout the country by starting with local areas. And the government will support regional efforts based on the assumption of EBPM promotion aimed at striking a balance between agile development and the medium and long-term perspective. We will utilize digital power to further accelerate regional job creation, enhance the flow of people to local areas, and create community-based innovation. The vision focuses on 4 broad initiatives. The first one is building digital infrastructure. The second, developing and securing human resources with digital skills. The third, implementing digital services to solve rural issues. And the fourth, initiatives to leave no one behind. I'd like to show the example of health tech services for the rural areas. Regional healthcare using mobile clinics can provide online medical care. Nurses on board the mobile clinics can communicate directly with patients and provide support, enabling doctors staying at clinics and patients to receive medical care online without having to travel far. Use of a vehicle dispatch app capable of detailed scheduling enables many doctors to connect more efficiently with patients. With more patients avoiding doctors and medical checkups due to COVID-19, mobile clinics are more important than ever. Construction of various new medical models is also underway for a system to connect doctors or midwives online with expectant mothers who may have difficulty leaving the house. DX is also used in the area of agriculture. Automated robot tractors that use positional information have been introduced. Both GPS and position information from base stations are combined to determine the operating position. It is extremely accurate, and we can operate the tractors remotely while checking the images from onboard cameras. Robot tractors have enabled us to cut our working hours and greatly increase our productivity. The issue like aging farming population in rural areas and the shortage of new farmers will be solved. We can also use data sensing for weather and working conditions and continue to make progress toward high value added agriculture. And here I'd like to introduce the Special Commission on Digital Administrative Reform. The Special Commission on Digital Administrative Reform formulated digital principles for structural reforms as a compass for Japan to promote digitalization. This commission aims to inspect the various regulations to comply with the digital principles and then reviews them as necessary. The commission has reviewed for 7 items. The 7 items refer to analog regulations such as visual inspection, regular inspection, field audit, residency full-time, return notice, in-person course, and on-site viewing inspection. These digital principles for structural reforms and Digital Garden City Nation project are the 2 strategic initiatives of Prime Minister Kishida. I'm going to stop here and happy to answer to your questions.
Very good. Thank you so much. That's a very nice outline of what's in train. There are a lot of issues and questions that I'm sure will come up in a little bit. But first, let's go to Ambassador Emanuel, who will talk a little bit about US-Japan cooperation and some other elements about this digital garden city and how we can help each other. Mr. Ambassador.
Well, I think that first of all, thank you for doing this forum. I do think that the digital city provides an opportunity for Japan and the United States, the 1st and 3rd largest economies in the world. You know, a lot of people think the digital economy is concentrated around some big tech companies like Apple, Amazon, Microsoft. It's quite clear, you know, if you're involved in industrial company, major multinational healthcare company, financial services, everybody's a data company. Mm-hmm. And the entire digital world is a digital city effort is in making sure that you bring more people into that. And it's a more inclusive approach rather than an exclusive approach. And by ensuring there's training, ensuring like in the United States, we're bringing broadband to the rural communities, you're making sure that that digitization and where the economy is heading is an inclusive outlook and perspective rather than exclusionary, and bringing more people into that economy. Mm-hmm. Here in Japan, there are unique challenges, not too different, but in the rural areas, there's also in the sense of a workforce where it can be more training, where you help people enter into the middle class and have a more stable financial security effort. And I think in the United States and Japan, there's also the element, there's a national security, economic security component that deals with writing the rules in a digital future in a way that is more favorable to the United States, Japan, and our strategic vision, rather than conceding that ground to China and others who want to have a future that's written around the rules that benefit their economy, their companies, their industry. That's kind of it in a nutshell. And I do think that there's a lot here for the United States and Japan to learn from each other, work with each other on, and then also lead with each other in setting up the rules. But my main thing, and I think what's most important about it for all of us, is take manufacturing. that's going to go towards a more advanced manufacturing model for the two economies. It requires a level of STEM education that doesn't exist today in a kind of a ubiquitous way across the system. That's also going to include training for those who are in the workforce today to stay in the workforce and advance up the economic ladder. We have a lot of goals, but you got to do it in a way that brings people education level, skill level up. And to me, that's going to make it a more inclusive effort.
Thank you very much. You've outlined a number of very important things, particularly the role of education, the role of training. But in an earlier meeting and in a recent book, you said that you wanted to be mayor of a city because that's where the real decisions are made. Two things I want to ask. First of all, what were the things that you did in Chicago to help spread these digital technologies? And then second, in light of Minister Makishima's focus on local governments, what advice would you give as a former mayor to mayors around Japan to push this agenda forward?
Well, look, I do believe, and the premise of, I wrote the book at the last year of being mayor was, a lot of people talk about it subnationals as if it's below something. You're actually seeing cities in a major way make the difference on climate change, make the difference on policies about sexual orientation, things that national governments cannot do for a host of both political policy and organizational capacity. Mayors of major cities, medium-sized cities, can actually get these things done, and they're closer to where people live, work, and play. And therefore, they have a greater sensitivity. What we did in Chicago, I think there's probably 2 or 3 things that I would point to. I remember the challenges of the city of Chicago, somewhat transferable, somewhat not. One is in Chicago, the mayor runs and appoints the community college system, which is a 2-year college system. It's the second largest one in the United States. We became the first city in the United States that if you got a B average in high school, we made community college free. Both the tuition, books, and transportation. Now, I believe it's always been true, but it's even more true where you have a technologically driven economy. You earn what you learn.
Yes.
Now, you could say something about the last 100 years where a high school education and an industrial economy was sufficient, but America's advanced in the 20th century, and I make this point in the book. We're the most educated army that went to World War II, based by high school education. Well, the community college education today is going to be what the high school education was for the last 100 years. And I wanted to make sure, both on the policy level as well as the technical level, that the kids that were going to community colleges had the same chance of a future as the kids that were also going on to 4-year institutions. And we redesigned our community colleges system. There were 7 of them. Each one was aligned with the sector of the economy with the fastest growing part of the economy: financial services, food, hospitality, advanced manufacturing, transportation, distribution, logistics, as well as technology as a whole. Second, we redesigned our high school education. By the time I was done, 50% of all high school kids were already taking college-acquired classes. So they were graduating with college education. We did it through a dual credit, dual enrollment program with our community colleges. So high school and community colleges became linked. We did it with the largest advanced placement and the most extensive and largest international baccalaureate program. But by the time 2018 rolled around, 50% of all kids graduating high school from the city of Chicago had a credit, if not a full semester, under their belt of college education. That meant, especially for kids, I'll give you by way of reference, in the city of Chicago, 84% of the kids are kids of poverty or below. So they could raise their sights and see themselves in a future where they were part of that economy that they saw in Chicago's downtown business district. Whether that was industrial, whether that was transportation, distribution, logistics, whether it was healthcare, whatever it was, they knew they had a future and they had a passport, meaning their education, for that future. We did one other thing. The armed forces had a program for cybersecurity, which was when kids were coming out of the armed forces, Iraq, Afghanistan, or National Guard. There was a 6-month boot camp, and they had a certificate. The starting salary was $90,000, and in 6 months you had a certificate for cybersecurity. We became the first school system, that is through the community colleges, where we did that not only for military, but for civilians. And that made sure that if somebody didn't want to do a 2-year education, but came out of high school in 6 months, they had a certificate for cybersecurity. Whether your work, I don't know what that was, but I hope it was not an editorial comment. But if you're working in healthcare, financial services, industrial, anything in the professional services, there's not going to be a shortage. There's not going to be a limit or a recession in cybersecurity. That's an evergreen. So that was another way that we made sure through education, through skill acquisition, everybody had a chance at a successful part of the economy. And they were conversant in the digital world. I am not that, but I look at what my kids are doing, and they're incredibly in a different level, different skill set. I'm not of that level, and it has its limits. And so that's what's to make sure that the children of the city of Chicago have that capacity. Those are just off the top of the head. Great,
magnificent. Former Minister Makishima,
yes.
From what the ambassador has just said, and given your focus on local governments, what parts of the ambassador's statement just now do you think are transferable? What would have to change, and who decides what in local governments? Would the Ministry of Education have to change its approach? Would local governments have to change their approach to education? How can we take this, was it earn what you learn phrase, or earn enough to learn enough to earn more idea? How can we apply that to Japanese regional governments as part of the digital initiative?
Thank you very much. I was so much impressed with the Ambassador Emanuel's episodes as mayor. And I've met many very much active mayors or governors in Japan. But not only these mayors or governors, but we hope all governors and mayors are so much interested in digitalization or digital garden city concepts, or building the maps for the younger generations with a greater, brighter future. And we do have the plan to promote the program to honorary train 450,000 personnel to be responsible for the promotion of digitalization in local regions. So far, we have many experts in areas of engineering or programming in Tokyo or in Osaka or in big cities, but we need more in rural areas. But at the same time, we've met many younger generations who like to make a difference in facing the issues in local areas. And they might get some chances in Tokyo, but in rural areas, they can get chances more, or the mayors or governors who can claim we do have issues here, or we have challenges here, and we need help. And with these voices heard by the younger generations living in Tokyo, for them, these local areas are so much attractive. And they can challenge there, and they can test their new approaches or imagination or ideas in rural areas. So we hope mayors to open their minds and claim that we have difficulties here and we need the younger generations to work with and tackle with these issues. It's not the shame of them. It's kind of the proud for them to announce the situation of the status quo of their towns or villages. So we like to change the mindset of these local readers. And as Minister for Digital Agency, we've recruited many local government employees, staff, and local civilians work for the local governments and to join the digital agency. And the people dispatched from these local areas and cities and towns will work with the mayors or the local leaders there. And I hope these young generations will change the mind of these rural areas.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think changing the mindset is very important. One of the things I was most happy to see in recent months is that regional governors, regional mayors are competing with each other to see who can take more Ukrainian refugees. This is a very forward-looking thing. I hope it's moving as fast as it can. How do you change the mindset? There's a famous phrase from Upton Sinclair. He said, "It's hard to convince a man of something if he gets paid not to believe it." So how do we get people to get paid to believe this? How do we fund it? How do we find the money to do it? And will that funding for this digital city require adjustments in other government programs?
I think when we promoted the digital revitalization for 5 and 6 years so far, we've seen the local areas are rivals for mayors, and they try to promote more local revitalization agendas quickly than other areas. But now we are asking them to learn from other local areas. Like when we see the guidelines of the Digital Garden City Nation or the Digital Garden City Nation projects, we've seen many successful local governments so far. So for the kind of startup levels or the starters levels of local governments can learn from the successful, the mentors, cities or towns. So for many years, local governments, leaders and mayors have difficulties to learn from other successful governments. But we are now asking them to learn from them and catch up quickly. And because we do not have so much time left now. So to shorten the time period to catch up the level of the DX of local areas, we want them to learn from the successful examples.
Yeah, indeed. There's not that much time left to really get this done. Mr. Ambassador, could I go back to you? One of the big promises of this new digital technology is it'll provide more rapid information to deal with crises as they come up. In the US, one of our problems is just local security. Unfortunately, there's a lot of homelessness, a lot of violence, not necessarily related to each other, but sometimes they are. How can this new technology be used to improve public safety without creating a police state like they have in China?
Well, let me go back to the first question earlier. I forgot to mention, we also made by high school education, you had to be conversant with coding and computer science, meaning we changed the curriculum. This is a bone of contention for me. A lot of people, at least in the States, I can't speak to Japan, I'm not familiar with it enough, but high school was about graduation, where you need to get it to be prepared about what comes next in your education, not about graduation. It was like preparing for what's next. And kids today, as a father of 3 young adults who are 22, 24, and 25, but at that time when I was mayor, they are just more comfortable with technology at a level that their parents are not. And if you don't have a curriculum like that, you're going to lose their attention. And so it's not for what comes later, although that there is a education lifetime learning component to this, where you get adults in that. So I do think one of the components that change was making sure you had a curriculum and a mindset of that curriculum that focused on not graduation, but preparing kids for what comes next in their education. And technology was the second language. It wasn't Spanish. Where we talk about bilingual, that's not a challenge here in Japan, but bilingual is not English and Spanish. It's whatever is your language and computer coding. That's the language you got to know for the 21st century. And that became standard in Chicago. Now, look, on public safety, you do have civil liberty issues. You're not going to get, it's a constant, you're not going to find an equilibrium and stop. It's a constant question about what works, what doesn't work, adjusting things in that ever-ending appropriate tension between public safety and people's civil liberties and privacy. And technology can be at a lot of different levels work. Like one of the things we did in Chicago was deployment of, look, if you have a problem on safety, you'd have to call 911 and say, I heard some, shots or whatever in a neighborhood. Well, nobody can tell you based on hearing where it's coming from. And then you got to get 911, 911's got to dispatch people, etc. We deployed in certain parts of the city, and this is also true in other cities across the United States, the technology called ShotSpotter. We could tell you instantaneously where that was coming from, and it went right to the phone of a police officer in that district. So you cut out 911, you cut out all the discrepancy of where the sound was coming from, and it could locate it. And that 1 minute or 2 minute in saving time was a lifesaver. Now, a big debate in the United States right now, this is not so much digitization, but it still is, do police departments deploy drones, oversee an area? That's a big debate, and it should be a big debate. It should be a discussion. The other piece of that technology is also how to communicate directly to a neighborhood rather than information coming this way. It's a two-way communication. Now, part of public safety is also improving the quality of life of a neighborhood. So we were able, again, another thing was the old 311 for non-emergency services. But we changed it so you could use different platforms to communicate how to get a tree trimmed, the light changed, etc. And those all improve the quality of life of a neighborhood, which then created a more conducive environment for less crime rather than more crime. There's a direct relationship with all the technology, all the data shows you that. We switched all our street lights. They went LED, but also we did it with a smart technology. So rather than wait for a light to go out and somebody in the neighborhood call, then this 311, then it gets a service team dispatched. We could tell by the technology that light was coming, the LED was coming to an end, and we would send somebody out before the light went out to replace it. We had the ability in different neighborhoods, certain lights were higher in lighting, certain were dimmer at night, and we could change that based on that particular neighborhood safety profile versus other. So there's a lot of other different way where you get out of the old command structure of a city controlling information, dispensing it out mass to more nuanced area dealing with individuals, neighborhoods on a more kind of custom version for a better way of thinking about it. So there's a lot of ways to deal with that from a public safety standpoint and using that technology.
That's wonderful. In fact, what you say reminds me of this sort of change in organizational theory now, moving as organizations move from pyramidal structures to call it dense connectivity. This apparently is a great...
I don't know what you just said, but I'm for it. That sounds exactly right. I have no idea. I got a master's degree. I have no idea what you just said, but it sounds right.
Okay.
I'm for it. Whatever that is, put me in.
Okay.
I'm a supporter.
Okay, very good. I'll send you my slide. Okay. So applying this into Japan, okay, one of the issues in Japan has been this sort of top-down mentality in different services. The Ministry of Health does one set of things, the Ministry of Local Affairs does another set of things. They don't talk to each other very much. So how is the digital age?
Let me just say, I don't mean to interrupt you a second time, but I wouldn't limit that to Japan. I think that's universal to every bureaucracy anywhere in any government of any size.
In any galaxy. I'm
yeah,
sure.
yeah. This is not one where I'd beat up Japan on.
Thank
That
you.
said, one of the issues, the things that I think is wonderful about the DX agency is that it's brought in private sector people. It's also brought in people from a number of agencies in the rest of the government. So now you know who to call. And there's a very interesting background. The Japan Defense Academy down in your district, I presume, actually was organized as a single academy for all of the services, specifically because the prime minister at the time, Yoshida Shigeru, wanted the different arms of the military to talk to each other, which they had not been doing, and that was one of the sources of all the horrible things that happened. So given this basis, how is Japan moving toward a less pyramid structured government and a more cross-connected government?
Thank you very much. I've never used the phrase like dense connectivity, but I think that needs to be the key phrase for the bureaucracy of Japan or other bureaucracies all over the world. And we've seen so much silos between and among the administrations and agencies or ministries in the world or in Japan, of course. And a digital agency became the showcase and a new model for the administrative organization. It's so much unique and it's so much new to us. And 1/3 staff of digital agency come from the private sectors, and some of them are the startup founders. They can work remotely or twice a week, and so much flexibility we can see and we can show to other ministries and agencies. And about 2/3 of them are from the public sectors, from many ministries and agencies. And the digital agency became one organization that are necessary to work with other ministries and agencies to create the fastest DX of Japan as control tower of digital agency. And when we discuss the issues of digitalization, we need to address many industries or many agencies or ministries, like agriculture will be one, or the health tech will be one, and mass or mobility will be one, or of course we can use drones to deliver the fresh milk and newspaper to the rural mountainside. There one single old lady is living alone. The kind of situation are the challenges for us. So we need to cooperate together to tackle these issues, especially when we discuss the rural areas. So the connections with other ministries and agencies are the key and the necessary points to go through and overcome the challenges and move forward to the digitalization of Japan. So this agency has the very big responsibility to work as the coordination.
Yes, indeed. If I may just share a screen, if this works, I'm not sure if it'll work, but this is what I mean by dense connectivity. Start in the lower left with a group that's not so well connected, the guys with the external information, the red lines, they're not connected to the big guys, whatever. And you have to move that kind of organization, which is basically pyramidal in structure, toward the one on the right, where everybody talks to everybody and everybody has outside connections. So that's what the idea basically means.
And I'd like to add one more thing. This agency is the official or control tower as the data authority. So the digital agency should make the data authority strategy for the Japanese society. So data is the essence in the new economic, the growth, I believe, and that will be the key issues for the global platform, or the how to work with the likely minded countries, or with the United States and Japan or other Asian friends. So DFFT, data free flow with trust, will be the key issues to discuss next year as chair country of the G7 summits.
If I may ask one last question before we move to questions from the audience. One of the key issues, obviously, in government is who has the authority to tell people what to do. One of the interesting things about the digital agency, if I understand correctly, is that the digital ministry actually does have the authority. to tell different ministries that they must adopt certain data techniques. Okay? So the question to former Minister Makishima is, when the DX agency tells, say, the Ministry of Health and Welfare, you have to do it this way, and they say, oh, that'll take 2 years to do, what do you tell them? And for Ambassador Emanuel, given your experience, how do you make authority stick and make people sort of do the things that you want them to do? So let's start with former Minister Makishima.
Yes, it's a very important point. We try to communicate with other ministries so often, almost every day, with very much dense level. And sometimes both ministers should discuss one issue very much deeply. So the times or the frequency and the density are the keys to communicate with other ministries and agencies. We do have the power to recommend the digitalizations to other ministries. But I did not use the kind of power to make them or force them to do something. But we've asked a lot with so much energy and tension to cooperate. Ask them for their cooperation. That was my approach, because I wanted them to understand that DX is the issues for everyone. So sometimes some agencies or some ministries or some economic sector mention digital agency is the organization of the experts. So we can ask them to do something and we don't have to worry about that. I didn't want that approach. I wanted them to understand and join us. That was the approach that I pursued. So I didn't order them to do that, but I asked them to join us. That was the approach that I did.
Mr. Ambassador.
Look, I mean, look, in Chicago, which is my prior to this most recent assignment, it is the strongest constitutionally mayoral system in the United States of America. So I may not be the right person to ask this. I mean, you have control over the entire public school system, reports to the mayor, community colleges, transportation, airports, police, fire, libraries, housing, parks.
Wow.
It's a $20 billion enterprise that reports to the mayor. You appoint the head of it and then the board. So it's kind of, may not be applicable. I think if I could then extrapolate, I think the question, the right way to look at it is, if you're trying to change not just a policy, but a culture, it's buy-in on the front end. Because if people at least feel like they are part of it, they're going to adopt it rather than it being kind of forced on them. So that's kind of a general rule. And I will say it's the hardest thing is not the rule. The hardest thing is the cultural change. Let me give you one example. When I was mayor, a lot of cynicism about services going to cities. So I put on, you don't have it here, but snow plows were a big deal, plowing streets during the winter in Chicago. So I put a snowplow tracker, so any citizen can go online and see where the trucks were in their city and where they were in their neighborhood and when they were going to come down their street. So they could know if they had to move their car or they didn't want to get the snow pushed up against their car so they couldn't get out in the morning to get to work. And everybody at the Department of Streets and Sanitation, why do we want to do a snowplow tracker? I said, well, the citizens are our customers. We're in the business of sharing information so they can make an informed decision themselves. And it was like you ever notice when a dog kind of hears a sound and it turns its head? It was like, and it's not sure what it's hearing. Everybody there, like they couldn't understand, like we would be sharing information with the public so the public would understand And it's a more decentralized approach rather than you make this decision, goes out to the deputies make this decision, goes out to the associates, and down that way from a pyramid structure and top down to more of a decentralized where information goes both ways, not one way. But that said, getting people to understand that and bought into that was, I think, an easier way to, when you say, how do you get it to stick? If they feel like if any entity feels like they had a voice in the formation, it's better. It doesn't mean it always happens that way. Sometimes you just got to brute force. But that's a joke, okay? But you got to make it happen, and you got to hold people accountable for implementation.
So call it promotion works better than coercion, or persuasion works better than coercion.
Well,
so,
you got to have a lot of tools in your toolbox.
Let's move to some questions, if I may, from our viewers. First, we only have a couple minutes. How is Japan promoting the digital garden city nation in terms of system regulation, particularly the My Number card? What role does that play? Second question to both panelists. In rural areas, how do you train people to use the technology so that the digital divide is not so great? And then perhaps for the ambassador, a lot of talk about digital transformation, but how do we deal with coercion by nations like China, North Korea, Russia, etc.? So start with Minister Makishima.
Yes, thank you very much for interest in My Number cards. We are promoting My Number cards so far, and we hope every Japanese citizen will get the card by the end of this fiscal year. And now the My Number card can be used as My Number health insurance cards, I think, which is the key for especially the elderly persons. And they can check with doctors or the pharmacists what kind of drugs they have taken so far. And especially when we face the natural disaster and when we get to the evacuation centers, many people have asked what kinds of medicines do you take? And almost all senior citizens cannot explain or remember and say the names of the drugs, which is very long. And in many cases, they take multiple medical drugs. So they can use this My Number card, health insurance cards to explain their health situations with specialists like doctors and pharmacists, which is the one image that we'd like to share with the people of Japan. And now it's in the process of testing with some local governments, but when they call the ambulance 911 in the United States and 119 in Japan, they can use this My Number cards to tell which hospital or clinics they go usually, or which kinds of the operations they have done so far. So that might be easier for them to be treated properly. So this is one of the concepts of the My Number, use of the My Number cards. And training the people in local areas, we have the program of the voluntary digital supporters organizations. And we've asked more than 20,000 people to help, especially the senior citizens using the smartphones in local areas. And with the assistance of the experts or the cell phone shops staff or the voluntary organizations in local areas, they are providing the opportunities for them to learn how to use the Maps app or how to use communication apps with their grandchildren, etc. And that is part of the voluntary work and group and movement Japanese society. And the other one is, as Ambassador Emanuel has already mentioned, training the high school students or junior high or elementary school students necessary approach. And we've received many voices from the school children, and they know how to use their iPads or computers sometimes better than teachers.
Yes.
And we know the merits and or the disadvantages of using the SNS, or we know how to use the SNS correctly and properly. And we know we should not use SNS as bullying my friends. So trust us and let us use these technologies at home too. And so we receive many voices from children, and so they know how to use them. Of course, we need to be more careful about the uses of the technologies, or especially the SNS for children. But at the same time, with these trainings or the programs offered by school teachers or the experts at school, we like to ask them to use these technologies and learn how to use them.
Okay, very good. Mr. Ambassador, the minister has just mentioned the word bullying. There's a lot of concern about coercion from nations like China, North Korea, Russia, digital bullying, digital coercion. Do you have any comments on how we deal with that?
Well, first of all, I mean, I think you got to go back and think about the whole digitization. The original premise and promise of digitization was that technology would be empowering.
Yeah.
You saw that in the colored revolutions in Eastern Europe. You saw it in the green revolutions in the Middle East. And what states like China, Russia, Iran, North Korea have done, but mainly the first three, is used technology not to empower, but to enslave. And so they've inversed it and turned it inside out.
Yes.
There are experts in this area. I'm just as an observer of politics, you can see how they have taken the promise of technology and the iPhone or the telephone, which was supposed to empower people to be more democratic, et cetera, and used it for control rather than for empowerment. I don't know how you change that. I do know that if you look at it and you look at what's happening today in Iran, you look at what's happening in Russia, you look at what's happening in China, even with the greatest of effort of the state to try to control information and the citizens, they have failed. Because in the end of the day, the human spirit does drive itself towards a more empowering individual and freedom rather than one of enslavement. If the autocratic systems, authoritative systems, can turn technology against itself, I think there's a lot of smart people that figure out how to take technology and turn it back into an empowering us. I'm not of that person. I'm still trying to figure out how to turn on my TV with a remote control. So I'm like the last person to ask, but I do think a call out to the people, the kids and the youth in China. They knew just by holding up a white paper, the Chinese government could not stop that from spreading as part of a social message on mobile apps. It's just a piece of paper, but it had a power. They used the state against the state. And I'm not sure, I mean, there's a lot of social scientists out there, people study social movements, the rhetoric of social movement communication. They'll analyze all this. But when you think about all the things that are being done, state to state against Iran, putting it on a sanction list, doing this, it was the headscarf. It was a simple element about controlling somebody's life. It was in the streets of Shanghai, Beijing, where it was about wearing a mask. And that became a social movement that brought people together. And then they used simply holding up a white piece of paper as a way to turn the state, the authority of technology against them in a way that if you go dial back and you look at Hong Kong protesters wearing a mask and an umbrella to protect their face from facial AI technology that was used for control. People, in an attempt to be heard, seen, and free, ultimately find a way through the cracks of authority. And I'm not sure what to say, but to observe that and to note that you can't repress it. I mean, I kind of made a comment today on social media myself, which is in Iran, they're killing young people because they don't want to wear a hijab, headscarf. In China, they're detaining and arresting people because they don't want to wear a mask. And in Russia, millions of people are fleeing because they don't want to wear a military uniform. So that tells you that, and people know about it from each other, that there's this human desire for freedom.
Yeah, thank you very much. We're a bit over time. I think, Mr. Ambassador,
I have to go.
So you get a hop. So thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you, Ms. Makishima, for the thing today. There's a satisfaction survey, so please fill it out. And let me also ask everyone to attend the next Asia Undercurrent on December 16th, World Without Nukes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.